Parshas Pekudei. Right? Page 530. Page 530 in the article. Parashat Pekudei is the last parasha in the book of Shemot. Nachmanides notes that you have to look at this book as a unit, and it really describes a very significant progression that occurs to the Hebrews, to the people of Israel. It starts off with a nation in slavery, with no identity, no freedom. They gain their freedom, they gain their identity, they experience a revelation, and then it culminates with the structure that we call the tabernacle, the Mishkan. We bring the presence of God into our world. And for us Jews, a temple is not just the structure where we go for spirituality, but it's a place where we walk away with spirituality. It's to guide us to be spiritual, good, wholesome people everywhere, not just when you are in a synagogue or in a temple or by a sanctuary, but rather you live your life by those values. And that's the end of the book, and that's really the end, that's really our mission as a nation. That's why it is so significant for our identity to have what we call a temple in Jerusalem, which is clearly the continuation of this tabernacle. So that's what Nachmanides tells us. Look at this book as a unit. Now we also know that it is important to look at the calendar of events, or the chronological order of events, as they occur in the wilderness. In other words, they leave Egypt, they experience the revelation at Sinai, on the holiday we call Shavuot. 40 days later they build the golden calf. And then Yom Kippur, the first Yom Kippur there is atonement, where God says, I have forgiven the people of Israel. Right after Yom Kippur they begin the process of gathering goods for the construction of the tabernacle. And it is finally built on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is what we call year 2. Year 1 is the Nisan that begins with the Exodus. Year 2 is the Nisan when they construct the tabernacle. Now, the 7 days leading to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the last 7 days of the year, they are, of course, the last 7 days of the month of Adar, are days that the rabbis identify, and they are actually spelled out in the text. They are called the Shivat Yemei HaMiluim. They are the 7 days where they are preparing themselves for the inauguration. And those are very unique days. Moshe Rabbeinu plays a very significant role during those days, we are told. And he actually serves like a Kohen Gadol during those 7 days. Those 7 days, perhaps due to the fact that they are at the end of a year, at the end of the year, and they are actually the 7 days leading to the construction of the tabernacle, they are viewed by some as 7 days that symbolize the end of days, what we call end of days. Now, Jews in general have a positive approach to the concept of end of days. In some cultures, you talk about the end of days and Armageddon, you talk about some scary things. For us Jews, yes, there are elements and there are indications in rabbinic sources that there are going to be challenging times, but it's a religion of optimism, peace in the world, the Jewish people fulfilling their mission, the nations of the world recognizing the role of the people of Israel and the land of Israel. That's how we see the end of days. And somehow the rabbis link, and there's logic to it, the last 7 days leading to the construction of the tabernacle can be compared to the days leading to the final rebuilding of the Bet HaMikdash, which is fundamental for us Jews. So if we analyze those days, and we analyze the way the rabbis understand those days, and as the Torah presents those days, we could perhaps have a little bit of an understanding of our days as well. But the question we are going to be dealing with is the name of the last portion in the book of Shemot, the name of the portion that is defining a period right before there's a building, a construction of a tabernacle, the name of a parasha that is in essence telling us the lasts, describing things that are occurring as they are finally putting together the pieces to fulfill the mission of the people of Israel. Because that's what the period symbolizes. So look at the first verse. Eile Pekudei HaMishkan. These are the reckonings of the tabernacle of testimony. And you should know that they were reckoned by Moshe. This is the first half of the verse. Reckoning, accounting, Jewish accountants playing a role in the tabernacle itself. Now, why is it so? So now, I'll share with you one more rabbinic statement, and then I'll try to put the pieces together. The rabbis in the Talmud ask, if indeed Moshe Rabbeinu, on those last 7 crucial days, served as a high priest, what kind of clothes did he wear? Can you believe it? The rabbis were asking that question. What was he wearing at that time? A suit, right? What kind of clothes the rabbis wonder? The rabbis tell us that you should know he wore, during that period of time, white garments, and these are the key words you have to remember, she'ein lo imra, that did not have a cuff, did not have cufflinks. It was straight. No pockets. No cufflinks. Why? What's wrong with cufflinks? It sounds like when you go to a tailor, they give you that offer. When I wear pants, so you want cufflinks? I hate cufflinks. I hate the cuffs. Cufflinks I hate as well. I think they're unnecessary, right? I don't think they serve any purpose. It's just another thing to put on, and if you put your hand down on the wrong position, it serves no purpose. But the cuffs are really problematic. They collect dust, right? And it costs more from the tailors. There's absolutely no reason for it. Some of you like it, I understand. I'm not messing with the different approaches. Now, the rabbis have to point out that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't like his cuffs. What's the idea behind it? So we are told the following, that, as you know, during the month of Adar, there is awareness to give tzedakah. The idea of giving funds during this period of time finds its origins in the fact that the fiscal year in the Bet HaMikdash would begin Rosh Chodesh Nisan. They needed funds for operating the temple. So they would begin the collection in the middle of the month of Adar. And already from the beginning of the month, the word was out. It's time to start collecting funds. So people would be giving tzedakah during Adar. Now, the way it worked is that they would raise a tremendous amount of money, bring it to Jerusalem and have it stored in a specific room. And then when it would be the time to pay those who need to be paid, they would send in a Kohen to take the money out and pay those who are providing the services. So we are told that when the Kohen goes in there, he has to be sure not to be wearing any pockets, not to be wearing his tefillin. Why? The rabbis tell us the following. We don't want, if let's say he becomes wealthy after that, you know what people are going to say? He took some money from the communal funds. If, on the other hand, he becomes poor, you know what people are going to say? Aha, God punished him because he took money from whatever he's going to do. So therefore, he got to walk in there, and he's going to be checked like a metal detector in the airport, and he probably had one of those, circular devices where he stood up there like that probably don't work, but were only put there because the company paid the government a lot of money for them. So he was checked through and through to be sure that nothing was taken. The same is being applied, believe it or not. So here we go. Those 7 days. This is a time that they are constructing. They're finalizing the work for the tabernacle. Lots of gold and lots of silver are available. Moshe Rabbeinu, we are told, has to be sure to wear garments that have no cuffs. That no one should go ahead and start questioning where is the money. This is what we are told. Fascinating statement about Moshe Rabbeinu. But I think that it's a very significant statement, and there is a reason that we are being told that there is a need for transparency, specifically as we are reaching the final point, as we are celebrating those 7 days, the days that symbolize the end of days. Last week, I was away. And Monday morning, you looked at the newspapers, or if you followed on the internet, or if you watched on TV, Monday morning, the world was reviewing the fact that the night before was a very important event, the Oscars. The Oscars, so people get their Oscars, and of course the most significant Oscar, from my understanding, is for the Best Picture. So what won the Best Picture this year? A movie, you don't have to know these things. Chumash, you have to know this, you don't have to know. But it was a movie called Spotlight. Now, what is Spotlight all about? I'm sure many of you know, but some don't. So, Spotlight was a true story. Around 15 years ago, the Boston Globe had this department called Spotlight, where they would focus on specific issues. And they started uncovering evidence about sexual abuse in the Catholic Diocese of Boston. And they found out that the Catholic, it wasn't just individual priests, but rather people were aware of it, and there was a cover-up. And when a priest would do something that was not appropriate, they would just move him to the next diocese and to the next one. And it was a problem that existed in Boston. They uncovered, I don't know, what was it, a couple dozen or many, many such cases. And then eventually it opened a can of worms that these issues in the Catholic Church are occurring not just in Boston, but throughout the United States and throughout the world. So there's a very serious issue that exists in the Catholic Church. Now, many of us, our first attitude is, Baruch Hashem, we're Jews. We don't have such issues, right? There is no sexual abuse among Jews. It's a goyish zach, you say. Now, I'll say straight out that, thank God, the numbers, yes, we have a problem, as I'll mention soon, but do not compare the numbers. In other words, in the Catholic Church, the percentage of those involved is very, very significant. Some say up to 40% of the Catholic priests, and even one case is serious. So you understand the significance. But unfortunately, you come back to Toronto, and the next day you see in the news that a teacher next door, not even across the street, across the alleyway, meaning in Eitz Chaim, who taught a few years ago, was also caught with activities that are quite shameful. And as we know very well, that these issues are extremely destructive to children, to kids, to teenagers. They lead to suicides. And Baruch Hashem, I could say that there's an awareness now that 25 years ago did not exist. No one talked about it, and when staff would inform, indeed, the administration that there's a problem with a specific teacher, it was shoved under the carpet. That was the minig Yisrael, because that was the minig in the whole world that existed at the time. So thank God there is an awareness. And you got to give some credit to the Boston Globe for uncovering it. Now they have, of course, their own agenda. Let's make this very, very clear. In the secular world, they don't believe in religion, but they have their own religion. And the religion is Hollywood and the media. Hollywood and the media, that is their religion. And it's worshipped. And it's holy. People in Hollywood think, right, that because they can act, they are the most significant, they are the wisest people, and they are the ones that are going to solve all world problems. And they use the form because, listen, if I could act, obviously I'm a goyim, I'm obviously a genius, and therefore anything I say should be followed. That is the new temple. And it's worshipped. People follow the life of these actors. The media itself also feels, in many ways, that they are here to solve all world problems. There is a need for media, there is no question about it. But in many ways, and the reason Hollywood was so excited to hand Spotlight, this is my own commentary, Spotlight the best picture. Now, I don't know if it was a good picture or not a good picture, but one thing I do know is it was, you say. One thing, I got already 2 thumbs up here from Cisco and Ebert. But one thing I do want to tell you is that there is no question that when there is a movie that makes Hollywood and the media into something very great and very successful, they're going to jump, and that's obviously going to be a front runner for the Oscar. This is a personal take because they have an agenda. We in Judaism, by the way, believe in being critical of ourselves. It is part of our identity. If you read the prophets, you realize that the prophets of Israel and leaders of Israel throughout the ages were always critical of the people of Israel. Why? Not because they wanted to put them down, but rather to perfect them, to elevate them, to make them into better people. So there's a very significant difference between criticism that is there to destroy or criticism that is there to improve. And it's a big problem that due to the fact that we have as Jews such a tradition of being critical of ourselves, that you have people that take it to an extreme. Why is it that you have in Israel the left that believe, and there are those, they have quotes from people in Israel who know that for them there is no difference between the Israeli soldier and what was done by the Nazis, by the SS. You have such statements made by Jews. Where does such madness come from? Well, we Jews are self-critical. There's no question about it. Self-criticism has its place for improvement. It has absolutely no room at all for self-destruction, but obviously you have those taking it to the next stage. Now, let's talk about transparency and the importance of transparency. So I mentioned the fact that unfortunately we've had, even in the religious community, cases of sexual abuse. A few of them obviously in Toronto. There are, I would say that in North America, they've uncovered a couple dozen, which is awful. One case is awful, how much more so a couple dozen. And the problem, just for the record, is the fact my father would share this story that there was once in a shtetl, a shaykhet. And the shaykhet, as he was getting older, had the difficulty keeping a steady hand. So therefore they felt that he should no longer be a shaykhet. So a few of the community leaders felt that, you know what, if he can't shecht anymore, so obviously he shouldn't be the one holding the knife, but let him become a melamed. Let him become a teacher. That's what they felt. So they go to the wise old rabbi and he said, so what do you think he's going to be doing now? He'll be shechting the kids. In other words, there was an attitude that has existed and does exist still by some that, okay, you can't do anything else, right? Those that can't do, what do? You teach. Those that can't teach, what do? Teach teachers. So they we have to be careful. We have to be careful here. The joke actually goes, they teach gym. There are different lines, but the truth is that there historically has been an issue with educators. We as Jews, imagine if you have in society a person who knows how to cross the street and he can't do anything else. So they say to him, you know what? Do you know how to cross the street? Yes. Oh, good. So can you become a teacher in our school to teach people how to cross the street? Now, many religious people, you pick up things, even if it's not one that's very interested or very bright, they're going to pick up things about religion, right? How to make kiddush, how to make havdalah, right? What the arba minim are. And then, if the day comes they need to make a job, they say, oh, you can't do anything else, but you know a little bit, so you become a teacher. So there has been a problem historically of teachers who are basically there because they can't do anything else. There has been such a problem. At the same time, we all know that I would say every single person could look back at one teacher who was a good teacher, and there is nothing like a teacher. A good teacher, right, makes people. It's an amazing thing. And it's a challenging position to be in because in general teachers are not respected. But the teacher who does it for the right reason changes lives. There's no question about it. A word, a positive word from a teacher can change and does change. And I could look back and I could tell you that my 6th grade teacher was a good teacher. Right now, it's not to say that the other ones were not, but I remember the 6th grade teacher because he had a positive attitude and he could look back and he could see the qualities. The good teacher, there is nothing like a good teacher, and it's the most important job in the world. The problem is that sometimes you will take someone because they can't do anything else. So that's regarding teachers and regarding these issues. What about transparency? So my point is as follows. If indeed this week's portion symbolizes a period of time towards the end of days, before we are trying to reach that ideal time when we have a tabernacle, a mishkan, or a Beis Hamikdash. It is a time that there is one word that leaders and the masses should be aware of: transparency. Leaders have the responsibility of being transparent. Leaders have the responsibility of being open. And just as Moshe Rabbeinu was told by the Almighty, you be sure that what you do is not questioned. You be sure to wear a garment that no one could question that you are walking away with funds. This is what is necessary at a time like exists today. I do have a belief that what is occurring in the world, if you study history and you look at the past 120 years, and you see the developments throughout the world and the developments of the people of Israel, the fact that 120 years ago you would tell any person that the majority of Jews are one day going to be living in the land of Israel, it would be considered impossible. And it is happening. If you look at what's happening in general in the world of values and leadership, right? You talk about the fact that you could have a debate among people running for the position of the most powerful human being or the most powerful man of the world, right, among the Republicans, or woman who most probably will win, but among the Republicans, the language that you would not expect a 2-year-old to use. So these are very interesting times. There is no question about it. And what we have to remember is the concept of transparency. The leader has the responsibility of recognizing how times have changed. When in the past it could be the Catholic Church or Lahavdil, it could be the rabbinic world, that there is no need to explain things, right? People will just accept authority for the fact that they are authority. Times are changing. Realities have changed. Now, a few years ago, here in Toronto, there was a meeting of rabbis, meetings of the Vad, and there was a speaker. The speaker was a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yaakov Horowitz. Rabbi Yaakov Horowitz, out of, I think, New York. And he has this project where he wants to bring awareness to children of issues of sexual matters. In other words, the greatest fear a parent has, or any decent human being should have, is that a child will be taken under the wing of someone who has problematic drives, and the child, thinking that its authority, is not going to open the mouth and say anything. And that's how these things have developed in the past in the Jewish world and throughout the world. I mentioned Jewish world, but let me make it clear again. It happens less by us, but even one case is a lot. So this Rabbi Yaakov Horowitz has an organization, and he put out videos, and they have a program which is being developed and worked with the schools to try to bring an awareness. And I think they're doing an excellent job in general. An excellent job that there is an awareness, and I think that we finally are confronting this very significant issue. Now, among the things this Rabbi Yaakov Horowitz pushes for is for the fact that if someone violated one of these issues, even if it occurred a few decades ago, that the police should be informed, and they should arrest the individual, charge him, and lock him up. Right? Sounds normal and sounds natural. And this is something that he has done. They have uncovered situations, informed the authorities, because if a person has done it, he's a danger to society. And if a person's a danger to society, you use any tools available to lock the individual up. As we are sitting there with the rabbis, and Rabbi Horowitz was presenting his case, one of the rabbis asked the question, why ruin a family? In other words, if someone did it 30 years ago, to go ahead and inform the authorities and arrest them 3 decades later, what are you achieving? This was a question that was asked. Rabbi Horowitz responded that you should know that it works as follows. If you have 2 highways, and there is a sign with a speed limit, and on one highway people know that there are cops, and on the other one there are no policemen, there are no cops. What's going to occur? Obviously, if there's a fact, and if there's an app, and there probably is by now an app, where you know that on a specific highways there are no policemen, like everyone says that the New York Thruway, be very careful, because if you go above 65 you'll be caught. So people are careful on the New York Thruway. On the other hand, in West Virginia, where, the cops are not, present, they're busy doing other things in West Virginia. So therefore, in West Virginia, people are going to speed and there are going to be more accidents. The point Rabbi Horowitz was making is that when you go ahead and lock up a pedophile, right, or lock up someone that sexually abused a child, so people are going to understand that this is something that is dealt with, and you be careful. And if you have an issue with it, you be sure it's your responsibility to keep yourself away from the children. This was the response of Rabbi Horowitz. Now, for me, that was an interesting conversation because I saw basically a conversation between the old thinking and the new thinking. The old thinking, and I'm not really blaming them because there was no understanding. There's a rabbi in New York that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. His name is Rabbi David Cohen. He's a rabbi in New York. And he said straight out, he mentioned this is already 15, 20 years ago, I heard it from him, that there was no understanding of how destructive abusing a child is sexually. In other words, 30 years ago, there was no understanding to what extent. They thought, okay, the adult did something wrong, not appropriate. Okay, so you move them away, you move on. Today, there is suddenly an understanding of it. There is an understanding to an extent because, number one, there's statistics that if it was done once by individual, the guy could do it again. There's an understanding that if the child was abused, unfortunately, there are statistics that he's going to have a temptation to want to do it. There are statistics that the percentage of suicide among such individuals is far greater. These are things that are known nowadays. And therefore, Rabbi David Cohen said that you can't really blame the authorities of 30 years ago because they did not have the understanding that we know today. So for me, this was a conversation between the old and the new. What do I take from this week's parsha more than anything else, besides this drasha that has been something that has been on my mind for a long time, is the fact that what we are being told is the place and the makom for transparency, being open. The concept that Moshe Rabbeinu could be told, you be sure that you go ahead and you serve Klal Yisrael. Be sure that the garments you are wearing are not ones that could create any other question. Now, another interesting rabbinic statement. If you study Talmud and you study any literature, you realize that there are different schools that exist. We call them Shammai and Hillel. What is the core difference? Every child is always taught that there's the Beis Hillel and the Beis Shammai. And often it's presented regarding specific details in Jewish law. But there's actually a difference in philosophy between the two. Shammai would tell you, there's a God of Israel. There are standards we should be following. And therefore, there's an expectation of perfection. The goal of the human being and the goal of the Jew is to try to match that perfection. Try to reach your ideals. Shammai. Hillel, on the other hand, would tell you, Hillel says, listen, the Torah was given to human beings. Humans are humans. Yes, you want to go ahead and bring God into the world, but recognize humans, recognize their state as human beings. This is an argument that they have. And therefore, when someone walks into Shammai, right, the Talmud tells us a story, that a person walks into Shammai's office and makes a request that they want to convert to Judaism, but they want to become the high priest. Now, obviously, if you convert to Judaism, you're not a Kohen. You cannot become the high priest. So we are told that Shammai sends the person out and says, I have no time for such nonsense. Hillel, on the other hand, tells us, what do you do in such a case? You work with them, you welcome them in, you teach them a little bit of Torah. As they develop an understanding of what Judaism is about, then they could go ahead and accept what you can achieve as an average Jew, even if you're not a Kohen Gadol. Now, there are many, many such statements that we find regarding Hillel versus the school of Shammai. Come the rabbis, and they tell us the following, that you should know. In the Messianic era, this is a statement the rabbis say, not to be taken literally, in the Messianic era, we are actually going to be following the school of Shammai. What does that mean? What are we being told? So, some note the following, that at a time that we have reached, that we have grown, that we have matured, that we sense our spiritual responsibility, we somehow have the tools of connecting to the God of Israel on that ideal level. Okay? Approach that works well. Now, if you look at Moshe Rabbeinu versus Aharon, take the two brothers, and take their personalities. What is Aharon HaKohen known for? Aharon HaKohen is known as a Ohev Shalom, Verodev Shalom, a person that pursues peace, understands the value of people interacting with one another in the proper way, recognizing that Torah was given to human beings. That's the approach of Aharon, and Aharon himself says a person should try to be mitalmidav. This is Hillel telling us. Hevei mitalmidav shel Aharon. Be a disciple of Aharon. Be a person that follows the school, the teachings, the philosophy of Aharon. Moshe Rabbeinu, on the other hand, was an individual, we are told, that didn't have the ability to bring people together like Aharon. He was not the people person, he was the person of the law. He was a person that if the law requires something, this is what is expected from all. This is Moshe Rabbeinu. And it's logical, because while Moshe Rabbeinu is on the top of the mountain, connecting to the God of Israel, teaching, learning the teachings of Israel, teaching the law in its purest form, Aharon is a person who is interacting with the nation. Different type of personalities. Now, if you take the rabbinic statement that in the Messianic era, we're going to be following the school of Shammai, and you understand that these last 7 days, have we addressed, the 7 days leading to Rosh Chodesh Nisan symbolize that period. So it seems to me that that period of time is a period where you could follow Shammai. Who could become like the high priest? Who? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu takes that role. Okay, so now there was a little bit more of an understanding regarding this issue. In Shulchan Aruch we are told that if you have communal leaders dealing with financial matters, people should not be scrutinizing them. In other words, don't think that when we talk about openness and we talk about transparency, it is the responsibility of the public to demand transparency, but rather it is the responsibility of the individual. It's a responsibility of the leader to be transparent. So there's a difference here. In other words, it often in society, the way we get things from leadership is by making demands. What we are being told here, that the demand is actually from the leader. It's an expectation from the leader that the leader himself shares, doesn't try to conceal things. And this rule doesn't just apply to areas of finance, but rather it relates to law itself. In other words, it could be in the past when there is a belief in authority that a rabbi or an authority could go ahead and tell you this is something that should be done, this is something that should be performed, and there's an expectation that if you heard it from the rabbi, you just do it. In an era when people are more educated, people are far more familiar with the system of the law. People want to have an understanding of why. There's actually a statement that rabbis and halachic authorities should not go ahead and do something that seems odd without an explanation. In other words, the concept of transparency even applies to the law, that if I'm going to go ahead and tell you that something is okay, I can't just get up and say so. If up until now you understood that it to be a problem, you cannot suddenly be told that it is okay, because people are going to start questioning either the authority or the whole system. You have to give them access to how you actually reached that decision. So this is something that we are told about the idea and the Jewish view of transparency itself. The saying of don't throw the baby out with bathwater. Right? So actually, I looked it up, where it originates actually in German. That sounds like a very German statement, by the way, right? So it's an issue that people actually have often, that whenever we are critical, from rabbis or minhagim, it should never be that we are questioning it as a form of rejection. It should always be questioning, right? To go ahead and get to it to the purest, to the actual truth. Now, I have another issue we have often is that I'm a believer in what is known as Gdolei Yisrael, that there are great rabbinic individuals that are extremely wise and extremely concerned for the welfare of the people of Israel. I believe in that. Now the problem is that quite often you can hear statements or sayings or decrees that seem to be so odd, right, and seem to be so harsh, and they are attributed to these great rabbis. So how do you deal with it? Right, this is a question that is asked. So people, unfortunately, get rid of the baby with the bathwater. And what they do is they reject the whole concept of the great rabbinic authority. I have a different school. I have a different approach. And the approach is that in almost every single case, what is occurring is that people are taking statements and misusing them, applying them in wrong situations, right? And the classic example I like giving, I've mentioned here recently, that in the middle of the 1930s, there was a desire to create a rabbinic international organization. And the desire was that when people had questions, they wanted guidance on issues, they would turn to this rabbinic international organization. And they turned to the great Reb Chaim Ozer of Vilna, asking him his opinion on the matter. And he shares with us that you should know, I am completely against such an organization. Because he tells us that you should know, I know from experience, that quite often when words, right, when decrees, statements, and letters would be coming out from a specific great rabbi, it wasn't the great rabbi, but rather it was one of his handlers, his maskir, his secretary. His secretary, the great rabbi, would decide that something is problematic, and what would he do? So he would send out a letter in the name of the great rabbi. It's a corruption that's hard to believe that exists. But for me, the benefit of that statement is that suddenly I don't start questioning the great rabbinic authority. I understand that you have to actually hear it from a reliable source. The rabbi himself, Rabbi Chaim Ozer, does not tell us the identity of who he is talking about, who the great rabbi was, and who the secretary was. But I have clear-cut evidence of who we're talking about, because towards the end of the 19th century, the great rabbi in Kovna was a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan was very well respected, and right after his passing, when they opened Yeshiva University in New York, it was named after him. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector had descendants in the United States. Among them, there was a senator, Arlen Spector, right, from Mishpacha of Reb Chaim Ozer. Now, Reb Chaim Ozer, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan, so there are a few situations that I know, and this is again from a record, that he had a secretary by the name of Yaakov Lifshitz. And Yaakov Lifshitz was a person who was very opinionated, and he had issues. For example, he was very strongly opposed to the Zionist movement. So he believed that it's a problem. So many statements were made in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan against the Zionist movement. These were occurrences that were frequent. The world itself, and therefore the point I'm trying to make, among the other things, is that it is a time, at times, when we have access to information, at times when you can no longer conceal truths. Things are uncovered. We have to embrace the new realities. We have to go ahead and realize that this demand for transparency is something that we shouldn't have a problem with, because if in its core Judaism is truth, we have nothing to conceal. If in its core there's a demand that if you do something wrong, you get punished for it, we should have nothing to conceal. Cover-up has no room in Judaism. And therefore reckoning, accounting, transparency is the theme of the Parsha that really ends the book of Shemot, which leads us to Vayikra. I apologize today for going off topic and for just using this more as a forum to share things that disturb me. I believe, Neder, I promise not to do this again. Yes?
I want to congratulate you on bringing up a difficult topic.
Yes.
I once heard that there was put forth an idea that before the rabbis are hired by congregations, they would accept, I think, I'm making an assumption, rabbis live in a very lonely world, in that they have nobody to go to I imagine, except the spouse perhaps, to talk about their issues, because
Right.
we're all human, we all have issues. So where do you
Right.
go? Like, where do you go? You tell your wife you're an abuser? I don't know, it's not a great place to go. So why doesn't the rabbinate, so what they were saying was, every rabbi should stand up and say, I am prepared to go to a psychologist
Right.
and let me talk to them about my issues. And if I'm not suitable for this job, or at least I'll deal with it, because I always wondered, why do they do this for year after year and nobody goes for help? Because they're embarrassed, obviously. So there's got to be,
Yeah.
you're talking about transparency, and the community has to set something up that they should be able to go for transparency.
There's no question that your question is very valid. This was, your suggestion came up after the events that occurred in Washington, D.C. There was a rabbi there who put the cameras in places that he shouldn't. It's a shul that was extremely damaged from it, and all of Judaism was damaged. It was on a biblical proportion how harmful it was. And it's a question of, like, as you put it, it's a lonely person. He should have, and perhaps there should be an expectation that he should be talking to someone. It is a suggestion. I don't know if it's going to fix all problems. In other words, obviously it's something that is addressing the issue, and the complexity is great, and the destruction that is caused by these incidents are great. Baruch Hashem, we're not the Catholic Church, and the numbers aren't there, but at the same time, you can't ignore them. Transparency is the essence of what we should be demanding, and your question is a valid one. Yes?
We heard Rabbi Horowitz speak at a home up north, and the point he made was that there's a false sense of security created by supposedly street-proofing your children. His statement was that the perpetrator will always be brighter than the child.
Yeah.
That it's not a once-off. They have prepared the groundwork. It's not
The grooming process. Yes,
Can
ma'am?
I just comment, because Debbie Fox, who's a woman from LA who created the whole safety program for the schools, so she spoke here and they said it was mandatory for all school parents to go. So I went, and she did mention, because this safety program has already been in place for a number of years, that it has already had effects, because maybe once the perpetrator has his kid hook, line, and sinker, it won't help anymore. But the initial stages, it may still help, and she did have concrete examples where kids actually did come forth and say, this person is offering me presents or donuts or to take me. So it has already been seen that it's helped and that.
You can't, I'm saying thank God that there's an awareness, because if you look back, 30 years ago, there were things that we were, in other words, when people were doing funny things, there was a butcher in Chicago, and he had a long white beard, the butcher. And people were saying that they used to call him Santa Claus. And then someone noted, by the way, they call him Santa Claus not just for his beard. Now, people were aware of it, but there was no understanding that this is something you should be alarmed and should immediately call the authorities. There was a lack of awareness 30 years ago, and I think it's in all communities. And I'm very thankful that, unfortunately, people paid the highest price for us to reach this point, but there is an awareness now, and I'm thankful for it. Yes?
I'm going to just interject, because I see that somebody left the room who knows about this. I was working at Jewish Family and Child Service when this particular situation that has now made all the papers next door came forward. There was an allegation. JF&CS sent in social workers to examine it, and it was clear. And I'm talking in the late 80s. I was there, and so were some people here in the room, and I think Mr. Martell is shaking his head. The agency knew what was going on, and the school said, please, he's got family, there's a parnasa, we will deal with it. The social worker who was involved with this case quit because she was not heard, because the agency, because of political reasons and board members and blah, 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 the Rebbeim in the community, because it was at the same time, Avram Friedman was there, it was at the same time when we were trying to make inroads in the Orthodox community. Avram Friedman and Selma Elzas were in charge of working in the Orthodox community, and therefore the Rebbeim in the school next door said, please, we're going to deal with it, and they let it go.
So
right?
A mistake, period.
But that's what went on in
That's
those
all.
days.
That's
what
exactly
went
the
on.
point. But and today, thank God, today the
Today it
rabbis
wouldn't
are going to be the ones that are
Today
going
it
to pick up
wouldn't
the
happen,
phone.
but that's what was going
But it
on,
did
and it
happen
was going
today.
on, it was like, we'll take care of it, we'll shush still, it's, you know.
That's the old approach. Anyway, very sad.
But it did happen today. They knew what was going on. They let him go, and then he went on to USDS.
Yeah,
It
but
did
he was
happen.
there for 20 years.
I know, but they didn't deal with it
That's right,
because
they
you
didn't
should
deal
never
with
have gone on to USDS or to work for the TDS.
Anyway, I apologize, but at the same time, this is an important discussion. We'll back to Parsha next week. All Parsha next week.
This morning, sharp.